The wagon wheels did not return that morning. The silence was heavier than the dust that clung to the road. 19-year-old Eva stood in the chill of dawn, her arms wrapped around her youngest brother, eyes fixed on the empty bend where her parents had vanished the day before. Her mother's shawl still hung from a low mesquite branch, tattered and forgotten, fluttering like a flag of surrender. Beside her, 3 siblings huddled close. Eli, 12, all sharp bones and clenched fists. Ruth, 9, with the same hollow cheeks as Eva, and baby Jonah, too weak to cry anymore, his breaths shallow against Eva's chest. "They're coming back," Ruth whispered, though her voice broke before the words were finished. Eva tightened her grip. "No, they're not." The truth landed like a stone. Their parents were gone, driven off by whiskey, bitterness, and debts too deep to climb out of. They hadn't even left bread, only the cracked kettle with the last thin broth burned at the bottom. Dust River, Texas, 1873, was not kind to the abandoned. The town looked the other way when children were left to fend for themselves. Names meant something here, and the Hanleys, Eva's family name, meant shame, violence, and broken trust. She would carry it no longer. Eva pulled the shawl from the tree and wrapped it tighter around Jonah. "We'll make do," she said, though her lips trembled. "We don't need their name, and we don't need them." The day stretched long. Hunger gnawed as the 4 searched the brush for prickly pears and the dry creek bed for anything edible. By nightfall, the desert cold cut through their thin clothes. Eli cursed under his breath. "We'll die out here." "Not if we keep moving," Eva said. She tried to sound steady, but when Jonah coughed weakly against her, she faltered. The weight of every choice pressed heavy. Stay and starve, or beg in town and risk being separated. They built a fire from brittle mesquite branches, though it gave little warmth. Huddled together, Eva stared at the flames until her vision blurred. She whispered, not to her siblings, but to the night. "Lord, if you're listening, give me something. Just something to keep them alive one more day." The answer came. At dawn, Eva woke to the smell of smoke, not from their dying fire, but fresher, richer, the smell of bacon fat. Her eyes snapped open, and there, just beyond the rocks, was a small bundle, wrapped bread, a strip of salted pork, and a flask of water. She jerked upright. "Eli!" Her brother scrambled to her side, eyes wide. "Where'd it come from?" Eva scanned the ridge. Shadows stretched long in the morning light, and for a flicker of a moment she saw him. A tall figure on horseback, broad shoulders under a dust-worn coat, moving silently away. He did not look back. "Who was it?" Ruth asked. Eva's chest tightened. "I don't know. But eat. He meant for us to eat." The stranger returned without words. Each day, food or firewood appeared nearby, never close enough to make contact, never far enough to mistake it for chance. Once, Eva caught him leaving a stack of kindling by the dry creek bed. He lifted his hat in the distance, nothing more, and rode off. The siblings whispered of him like a phantom. Eli called him the ghost rancher. Ruth insisted he was an angel, but Eva knew better. Angels didn't carry scars across their jaw or ride alone with eyes hard as winter stone. This was a man, flesh and blood, choosing to care without claiming reward, weeks blurred, hunger softened into strength again. The children's cheeks grew fuller, their eyes brighter, and still, the man kept his distance until the day Eva had enough of silence. She followed him. The morning was brittle with frost. When she spotted his horse cresting the ridge, she pressed Jonah into Eli's arms. "Keep watch on your brother." "Eva, don't." But she was already moving. Her boots crunched over frozen soil as she climbed. When she reached the rise, her breath came heavy, but her voice was clear. "Why?" The rancher stopped, reins slack in his hand. His horse snorted, pawing the dirt. He turned, his eyes dark beneath the brim of his hat. Eva stood tall, though her body shook. "Why us? You could have let us die." For a long moment only the wind moved. Then the man's voice came low, steady. Children shouldn't pay for the sins of their kin. Eva's throat tightened. The words cut through the shame that had wrapped her name like chains. For the first time since her parents left, she let herself believe they might survive. The rancher nudged his horse forward. "Name's Calder Reed. My land runs yonder." He tilted his chin toward the distant hills. "If you've got strength left, come by. I've work that needs doing." Eva swallowed, her heart pounding. She did not answer, but when he rode off, she whispered after him, "Calder Reed." A name that carried weight, but not shame. That night, by the fire, Eva told her siblings. "We're not the Hanleys anymore," she said firmly. "That name's dead to us." Eli frowned. "Then what are we?" Eva looked at them, firelight flickering in her eyes. "We'll find out. But for now, we've been given another chance, and I'll not waste it." The flames snapped. The children leaned closer. For the first time, hope felt possible. The wagon wheels had not returned, but something greater had taken their place, a path forward. The barn door groaned like it hadn't been opened in years. Eva stood in the wide shadow of Calder Reed's ranch, her siblings clinging to her skirts. Dust River stretched faint behind them, but here, this land felt different. Hills rolled like sleeping giants, grass bent under the wind, and the big barn loomed gray and stubborn against the sky. Calder led them there without flourish. He swung down from his horse, boots striking the packed earth with the thud of a man, used to silence. No speech of welcome, no gesture of pity, just the tug of the barn door and the smell of hay and old timber filling the air. "You can sleep here," he said, voice like gravel. Ruth pressed against Eva's side, her eyes wide, at the loft and scattered tools. Eli looked ready to spit. "We ain't cattle." Calder's gaze landed sharp on the boy. "You're not cattle, but you're not my kin either. This is shelter, and it's yours if you take it." Eva swallowed her pride. "We'll take it." That first night, Eva made a bed of hay for Jonah and wrapped the shawl tight around him. Ruth hummed soft lullabies, her voice trembling but tender. Eli paced until Eva hissed for him to rest. Through a crack in the barn wall, Eva could see Calder's lantern glow in the ranch house window. He hadn't eaten with them, hadn't spoken beyond what was needed, but somehow his presence steadied her. She whispered into the dark, "We'll earn it." One way or another. Morning came with hard labor. Calder's voice carried across the yard. "Water troughs dry, wood piles low. Chickens scatter come dawn if you don't mend the fence." Eva rolled up her sleeves. Eli groaned, but she shot him a look. "We work." By noon, her hands were raw, her back stiff. She dropped the last splintered board into place on the fence and straightened, sweat running down her neck. Calder approached, his shadow cutting across the ground. "You hold a hammer like you've done it before," he remarked. "My father believed in chores, not kindness," Eva said flatly. Calder's jaw tightened, but he didn't press. "That'll serve you here?" He walked off, leaving behind the faintest trace of respect. Days turned into rhythm. Eva rose before dawn to milk the cows. Ruth fed the hens, giggling when they pecked her shoes. Eli chopped wood until blisters turned to calluses. Even Jonah, toddling now, carried twigs to the pile. Still, Calder kept his distance. He spoke in clipped instructions, left food on the table without comment, and rode off to tend the herd with only a nod. But every so often, Eva caught something in him, a glance held longer than necessary, the faintest lift of his brow when Ruth laughed, the way his shoulders eased at the sight of Jonah toddling across the yard. One evening, as fire cracked in the barn hearth, Eva found him standing in the doorway. "You'll freeze if you keep to the barn come winter," he said. Eva straightened. "We're used to cold." "Don't matter. Cold doesn't care what you're used to." His gaze swept the children, softening just enough. "Come inside." The siblings looked at Eva. Her throat tightened. Trust was a heavy thing, but survival left little choice. She nodded. Inside the ranch house, warmth hit like a wave. A sturdy table, shelves lined with books, a quilt folded over a chair. It felt like another world. Ruth gasped. Eli shuffled awkwardly. Jonah reached for the quilt with tiny fingers. Calder set down bowls of stew, steam curling into the air. "Eat." Eva whispered, "Thank you." He didn't answer, but when Jonah smeared stew across his cheek and laughed, Calder almost smiled. Later, Eva lingered by the fire while the children slept on quilts laid out in the corner. Calder sat across the room, whittling a piece of wood into something unrecognizable. The scrape of his knife was the only sound. "Why us?" Eva asked at last. His knife paused. "Why not? You don't even know our name." Calder's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. "Don't need to. A name's just a word. What matters is what you do with it." Eva's chest ached. She wanted to tell him she had thrown hers away, that she'd sooner be nameless than wear her father's shame. But the words caught. Instead, she whispered, "Maybe you're right." The scrape of the knife resumed, steady as a heartbeat. Weeks grew into months. The Reed ranch began to feel less like borrowed ground and more like home. Eva scrubbed floors, sewed curtains, and taught Ruth her letters by the light of the fire. Eli rode with Calder to mend fences and learned the patience of cattle drives. Jonah's laughter filled every corner, but the outside world didn't forget. One afternoon, as Eva hung laundry on the line, 2 riders appeared at the edge of the property. Their suits were neat, their boots polished. Town men, sharp-eyed and purposeful. Calder came from the barn, wiping sweat from his brow. The taller of the 2 riders tipped his hat. "Mr. Reed, we hear you've got stray children on your land." Eva froze, the sheet clutched in her hands. The man smiled thin. "You know the law. Can't have wards running wild. The county's looking to place them proper." His gaze slid to Eva, cold and appraising. "We'll take them off your hands." Jonah's laugh from the porch rang in the air, pure and unknowing. Calder's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, his frame blocking the men's view. His voice came low, edged like steel. "No one takes what's mine to protect." Eva's heart pounded. The safety she'd begun to believe in now trembled on a knife's edge, and for the first time she realized, Calder's silence was not indifference, it was a promise. The men did not leave when told. Their polished boots stayed planted in the dust of Calder Reed's yard, eyes sharp and smug, as if the law was stitched into their fine coats. Eva clutched the sheet tighter, the wind snapping it like a warning flag. The taller man tipped his hat again, smile thin. "You misunderstand, Mr. Reed. This ain't a request. The county pays us to keep track of strays. No name, no family. These children don't belong here." Eli stiffened beside the porch, fists clenched. Ruth pressed against Eva, whispering, "Don't let them take us." Calder didn't move. His shadow stretched long across the ground, blocking the riders from coming closer. "They stay." The shorter man's laugh was slick as oil. "You've got no claim, no blood, and by law no right." Calder's jaw flexed. His voice came flat, steady as a drawn gun. "Then the law can ride on back to town." Eva's breath caught. She had expected Calder's silence, his distance, his quiet leaving of food in the night. But not this shield of a man standing between her family and the world. The taller man's smile faded. "We'll be back, Mr. Reed. With paper. With a sheriff." He turned his horse, dust swirling as the 2 rode off down the trail. Only then did Calder look at Eva. His words were few, but they landed heavy. "Keep the children close." Eva nodded, though her heart raced. She knew men like that didn't give up. That night, after the children fell asleep in the quilts by the fire, Eva stood at the window. The land stretched wide and endless, stars scattered across the sky like 1,000 watchful eyes. Yet she felt a storm coming, not of weather, but of men and their claims. Calder sat at the table, sharpening his knife, each drag against the whetstone echoing in the silence. Eva turned to him. "They'll come back." "Yes. You can't fight them all." His eyes lifted, dark as the night outside. "Can't let them break what's just begun to grow." Eva's throat tightened. She wanted to say thank you, wanted to confess the terror pressing on her chest. Instead, she whispered, "We'll stand with you." Calder's gaze softened for the barest flicker of a moment. Then he set the knife down, the blade gleaming. "Get rest. Tomorrow will be harder." The harder came quick. By dawn, gossip churned in Dust River. Children abandoned. A rancher harboring them. Whispers filled the saloon, the church pews, the trading post. Some pitied the girl with the stubborn chin and her ragged siblings. Others muttered of burden, shame, or lawlessness. Eva heard it when she dared go to town for flour. Women at the counter fell silent when she entered. One leaned to another, voice sharp enough to cut. "That's the Hanley girl. Her daddy beat a man half to death over a card game. Now she thinks she can make herself respectable." Eva straightened her shoulders, forcing her voice steady as she asked for her goods. But inside, her old shame clawed back. Hanley, Hanley. Hanley, like a curse that refused to die. She carried the sack of flour out, head high, only to find Calder waiting by the hitching post. He took the sack without a word, hoisting it onto his horse. "You didn't have to come," Eva muttered. "Yes, I did." She looked up at him, startled. His tone was final, as though written into stone. Back at the ranch, the unease lingered. Every creak of the barn, every rider in the distance, set Eva's nerves alight. Eli practiced with a slingshot, his jaw tight. Ruth prayed aloud at night, her small voice trembling but fierce. And Calder worked harder than before. He split fence posts till dusk, hammered boards into place, stockpiled firewood, preparing, Eva realized, not just for winter but for war. One evening, as Jonah slept against her shoulder, Eva whispered to Calder across the fire, "They'll come with the sheriff." "Yes." "And if the law takes us?" His eyes flicked to hers. "Then you speak for yourself. You choose your name. You're not bound to what your father left behind." The words lodged in Eva's chest. Choose your name. She'd never dared think it possible, but the thought planted itself like a seed in hard soil. The storm broke 3 nights later. Lanterns bobbed on the ridge, a line of riders moving slow but certain toward the ranch. Their shadows stretched. Long in the moonlight, law papers tucked under arms, rifles at their sides. Ruth clutched Eva's skirts. Eli grabbed a poker from the fire. Jonah whimpered in his sleep. Calder stepped outside, rifle in hand, shoulders squared against the night. His voice carried back to Eva, calm as iron. "Stay with the children." But Eva stepped out too, her chin high despite the fear twisting in her gut. "You said we could choose," she whispered. Calder glanced at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. Eva drew a breath that shook, then steadied. "Then I choose. I won't let them take us without a fight. Not as Hanleys, not as nameless strays. We'll stand." The riders drew closer, lantern light glinting off their polished boots and papers. The sheriff's voice rang out. "Calder Reed, you've no right to harbor these children. Step aside." The night held its breath. Eva reached for Calder's arm, not to hold him back, but to anchor herself to the promise he carried. And in that moment, nameless or not, she felt stronger than she ever had. The sheriff's paper curled in the fire before he could finish reading it. The night cracked open with gasps. The men on horseback shifted, their lanterns swinging, eyes flashing with outrage. Sheriff Holt's hand tightened on his pistol. As the parchment blackened in Calder's fire, Eva stood rooted, her hand clutching Calder's sleeve, the smell of smoke rising between them and the law. "You've crossed a line, Reed," Holt barked. "Those children are wards of the county. You're interfering with justice." Calder's voice came low and steady. "Justice don't ride on paper. It rides on truth. And the truth is she ain't no stray. She's chosen. She's stood by her kin when no one else would." Eva's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but Holt's cold gaze pinned her. "Girl," he snapped, "state your name." The words cut deeper than a blade. Eva faltered. Hanley tasted of shame. Silence tasted of nothing. But Calder's quiet presence beside her steadied her spine. She lifted her chin. "My name is Eva. Just Eva. And I ain't leaving." The sheriff sneered. "No name means no standing. You're dust, girl. Dust blows away." Calder shifted, his rifle resting easy against his arm, but his eyes hard as iron. "Not tonight it doesn't." The standoff stretched until even the horses stamped restless. Then, with a curse, Holt jerked his reins. "This ain't finished. You'll answer for it in court." The men wheeled their mounts, lanterns dwindling into the dark. Eva sagged, trembling with the weight of what she had dared. Calder's hand brushed hers, barely a touch, but enough to root her to the earth again. The next morning broke brittle and gray. Dust River buzzed with whispers before the sun fully rose. By midday, Eva could feel eyes burning holes in her back as she walked through town with Ruth and Jonah. "That's the nameless girl," someone hissed. "Hanley blood. Trouble follows it. Reed's gone mad, keeping her." Eva straightened, but her stomach churned. Every glance reminded her of the legacy she was chained to, a father's violence, a mother's silence. Inside the trading post, Mr. Kramer slid the sack of flour across the counter with a look sharp enough to cut. "Best you make your peace. With the county, girl. A roof don't change what you are." Her hands shook as she gathered the sack. Before she could answer, Calder's shadow fell over the counter. "She pays like anyone else," he said, voice flat but dangerous. Kramer swallowed, lips pressing shut. Eva whispered on the way out. "You shouldn't fight my battles." Calder glanced at her, unreadable. "Not fighting, standing. There's a difference." That night, when the children were asleep, Eva found him in the barn mending tack. She lingered in the doorway, the lamplight spilling across his broad shoulders. "My father," she began, the words catching in her throat. Calder looked up, quiet, waiting. "He used to say I'd never be more than his shame. Said I carried it in my face, in my blood. When he left us, part of me thought he was right." She gripped the post so tight her knuckles whitened. "That's why I threw the name away. Better nothing than that." The silence stretched, but not unkindly. Calder's hands stilled on the leather strap. His voice came low. "A man's sins don't bleed into his daughter unless she lets them. You stood your ground last night. That's more name than most men'll ever carry." Tears burned hot, but Eva blinked them back. "What if it's not enough? What if the sheriff comes again?" Calder set down the strap, his eyes dark and steady. "Then we'll meet him together." Her breath caught. For the first time she believed it. The following week tested that fragile belief. Holt summoned Calder to town, demanding he explain himself before the magistrate. Whispers swirled like storm clouds, Reed harboring strays, Reed defying the law. Eva wanted to beg him not to go, but Calder simply saddled his horse. "Justice don't wait for comfort," he said. When he returned, that evening his face was carved in stone. The county would not relent. Unless Eva could claim a name, the children would be seized. The barn grew silent that night. Ruth whimpered in her sleep. Eli muttered curses under his breath. Jonah clung to Eva's dress. Eva stared at the rafters. Until dawn, her mind torn between terror and resolve. 2 days later, she walked into the church. Dust River's congregation turned, whispers rising like a wave. She felt each eye on her like a brand, but she lifted her chin. "I want the record written," she said to the preacher. The old man frowned. "What name, child?" Her chest ached, but her voice rang steady. "Eva Boon. That's the name I claim." The words settled over the pews like thunder. Murmurs swelled. Boon, a name tied to strength, to hope, to fresh start. Not Hanley. Never again, Hanley. Outside, Calder waited at the hitching post, his face unreadable. But when she stepped down the church steps, he tipped his hat, just once, as though sealing something sacred. That evening, with the fire low and the children pressed close, Eva whispered the name aloud again. Boon. Eli frowned. "What's it mean?" "It means blessing," Eva said softly. "It means we're not cast-offs anymore. We're chosen." Jonah giggled at the sound, repeating it with clumsy cheer. "Boon!" The word filled the barn, stronger than the sheriff's paper. Stronger than gossip, Eva Boon, and for the first time in her life, she felt whole. The knock on the door came before sunrise. Eva jolted awake, heart pounding. The children stirred on their quilts, Jonah whimpering in his sleep. Calder was already at the door, rifle resting easy in his hands, shoulders squared against the pale light. Sheriff Holt stood framed in the doorway, 3 deputies at his back. "No lanterns this time. No pretense of civility. Just the cold morning and the law on his side." "Reed," Holt said, voice clipped. "The court's ruled. The girl and her kin are to be removed at once. Hand them over." Eva's blood turned to ice. She clutched Jonah tighter, Ruth pressing against her side, Eli bristling with barely contained fury. Calder didn't move. "The court don't own children." Holt's lip curled. "You think declaring a name changes a thing? Boon ain't worth ink on paper. She's Hanley blood, and we all know it." Eva stepped forward, chin high despite her shaking. "I said my name's Boon. That's all that matters. Not to the law. It ain't." Holt gestured to his men. "Do it." The deputies stepped forward. But Calder moved first. His rifle rose, steady as bedrock. His voice came like thunder. "No one crosses this threshold without stepping through me." The men froze. Holt's sneer faltered, but only for a breath. "You'd turn outlaw for them, Calder's?" Jaw clenched. "If outlaw means protecting what's right, then yes." The standoff broke only when the preacher arrived, breathless and pale, clutching his Bible. "Sheriff," he wheezed, "you'll not take her today." "The record's already written. She stood before God and this town as Eva Boon. You can tear paper, but you can't tear faith." The deputies shifted uneasily. The townsfolk had gathered too, drawn by the noise, farmers, ranch wives, children, peering from behind skirts. Whispers rippled. "She's Boon now. She stood her ground. Reed's right." Holt's face darkened, his power thinning with each pair of watching eyes. He spat into the dirt. "This ain't over." Then he turned, the deputies trailing like shadows. Eva's knees nearly buckled with relief. Calder lowered his rifle, but his eyes never left the road until Holt's riders disappeared beyond the ridge. That night, the ranch burned with unease. Eva sat by the fire, staring at her blistered hands. "He'll come again," Calder nodded, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. "Yes, but he won't find us unready." Eli leaned forward, eyes fierce. Teach me to fight." Calder studied him a long moment, then handed the boy a length of wood, shaped like a rifle. "First, you learn to stand steady. The rest comes later." Eva's chest tightened at the sight. The boy her father had called weak, now standing taller, fire in his eyes. The days that followed were heavy with preparation. Calder set Eva and Ruth to learning the rifle's weight, not to fire, but to understand it. Eli rode with him, learning every fence line, every creek bed, every angle of the land. At night, Eva lay awake, listening to the children breathe, whispering the name she had chosen like a prayer. Boon, Boon, Boon. But even prayer couldn't soften what came next. The attack did not come with papers, it came with fire. It was near midnight when Ruth's scream ripped the silence. Eva bolted upright to see the glow outside the barn window. Orange, wild, consuming. The haystack burned, flames clawing skyward, sparks leaping toward the roof. "Out!" Calder's voice thundered. He threw open the barn doors, shoving the children into the yard. Eli dragged Jonah, coughing through the smoke. Eva grabbed Ruth, but her eyes locked on the shadow moving beyond the flames. Men on horseback, faces hidden, torches in their fists. "Drive 'em out!" one shouted. "They don't belong!" The fire roared, heat searing her skin. Eva stumbled, clutching Ruth, heart hammering. Calder fired a warning shot into the air, the crack splitting the night. The riders wavered, but did not scatter. One hurled his torch against the barn wall. Flames licked higher. Eva cried out, "The children!" Calder grabbed her arm, dragging her clear as the roof timbers groaned. Jonah wailed in Eli's arms. Ruth sobbed against Eva's chest. And for a heartbeat, it felt as though everything they had built was turning to ash. But then the town came. Lanterns bobbed along the trail, voices shouting. Men from the church, women from the trading post, neighbors who had whispered before but now stood against the blaze. Buckets of water flew, shouts rose, and slowly the fire began to yield. The riders, seeing their numbers falter, cursed and wheeled, their horses disappearing into the night. Eva collapsed to her knees, coughing, Jonah clinging to her neck. Calder stood over them, rifle still in hand, eyes blazing like the embers. "You see now?" He growled. "This ain't about names. It's about who stands with you when the fire comes." Eva lifted her face to the circle of townsfolk, their lanterns casting halos against the dark. Some still looked wary, others firm, but they had come. They had chosen. For the first time, Eva felt not just sheltered, but defended, and she knew. Holt's fight was no longer just against them, it was against the whole of Dust River. The town square was too quiet when they rode in. Dust River had a way of buzzing with gossip, but that morning, the silence pressed heavy. Eva walked beside Calder, Ruth's small hand in hers, Eli trailing stiff with nerves, Jonah perched on her hip. They had come because there was no choice. The summons had been nailed to Reed's barn door at dawn. Sheriff Holt waited at the steps of the courthouse, papers thick in his hand. Behind him stood townsfolk, some sympathetic, some suspicious or curious. The preacher lingered too, Bible clutched close, his eyes anxious. "Calder Reed," Holt called, voice sharp as a whip. "You stand accused of obstruction of law, harboring abandoned minors, and defying county order." Gasps rippled. Eva's cheeks burned as eyes fixed on her, whispers hissing like snakes. "Hanley blood, trouble follows it. She'll bring Reed down with her." Calder didn't flinch. His rifle wasn't slung across his back today. Instead, his presence alone carried the weight of a man unyielding. Eva stepped forward before fear could still her voice. "If anyone's on trial, it's me. I'm the one you call nameless. I'm the one you tried to take." The murmur grew louder. Holt sneered. "Girl, you don't speak unless spoken to." But Calder's voice cut through. "She speaks now. She speaks as Eva Boon." Holt unfurled the paper with a flourish, words dripping with finality. "The county rules stand. The children are to be placed under guardianship in Austin. They'll be raised proper, not in barns by outlaws." Eva's stomach twisted. Austin, hundreds of miles away. They would be scattered, lost. The preacher stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. "She stood before this church, Sheriff. She claimed her name. That record holds." Holt slammed his hand against the railing. "A name chosen don't wash. Away a bloodline. She's Hanley, and Hanleys bring ruin. Eva's breath caught. The word clung like a curse. She saw the doubt in the crowd, the way some turned their faces, the way others whispered about her father's sins. For a heartbeat, shame pressed her down. But then Ruth squeezed her hand, Eli's chin jutted stubborn, and Jonah babbled Boon against her shoulder. Eva lifted her voice, steady now. My father's name is Ash. My mother left us to die. But I am not them. I am Boon, and these children are mine to protect. The square stilled. Even the wind seemed to pause. Holt's face darkened. He gestured to the deputies. Enough. Seize them. The deputies moved, but the crowd shifted too. Farmers stepped forward, hands gripping pitchforks. Wives pulled their children closer but did not step aside. Even Mr. Kramer from the trading post crossed his arms, blocking the way. They belong with Reed, someone called. She's Boon now, another said. Holt's jaw tightened, fury flashing. You'd all defy the law? Calder's voice thundered across the square. The law ain't worth a damn if it forgets mercy. The words cracked like a rifle shot. Holt's hand twitched near his pistol. For a moment, Eva felt the air tighten, one heartbeat away from blood. That night, the threat hung heavier than ever. Back at the ranch, Eva sat by the fire, her hands shaking though she tried to hide it. He won't stop. Next time he'll bring more men, maybe soldiers. What if we lose? Calder looked at her, his eyes softer than she had ever seen. Losing's what happens when you stop standing, and I don't see you stopping. Tears welled hot, but Eva smiled through them. You make it sound easy. He shook his head, leaning closer, voice rough but certain. Ain't easy. Worthwhile never is. The firelight flickered between them. For a moment, the weight of survival gave way to something gentler, something unspoken, but near enough to touch. Then Jonah stirred in his sleep, Ruth murmured, and the spell broke. Calder rose, jaw set again. Get rest. Tomorrow will test us. Harder. The test came sooner than dawn. Dogs barked in the distance, echoing against the hills. Lanterns glowed along the ridge. The sound of hooves, dozens, not a handful, rolled closer. Eva clutched her siblings, eyes wide. Calder lifted his rifle, face grim. They're not coming for talk this time, he said. The barn shuddered as torches lit the night. Men shouting Holt's name. Eva's chest burned with fear, but she stepped beside Calder, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. You said we'd face it together. He nodded once, firm. Together. And as the flames reflected, in the dark of his eyes, Eva knew the fight for their family, her family, had reached its breaking point. Tomorrow, Dust River would remember who Eva Boon truly was. The torches painted the night like war. Dust River had never seen so many riders gathered in the dark. Sheriff Holt sat at the front, his horse restless beneath him, his face twisted with triumph. Behind him, a dozen men carried rifles and torches, their shadows crawling up the ranch walls like fire itself. Inside the barn, Eva pressed Jonah against her chest, Ruth and Eli flanking her with wide, frightened eyes. Calder stood at the door, rifle steady, his frame etched in firelight. This ends tonight, Reed, Holt's voice thundered. Hand over the girl and her strays, or I'll burn you out like vermin. The children clung tighter. Eva swallowed. Her fear, her heart hammering so loud, she thought they could all hear it. Calder didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. You'll not touch them. Not while I stand. The riders jeered, some shouting, some spitting into the dust. Holt sneered, lifting his torch higher. You'd risk your life for a nameless girl? For Hanley blood? You'll die for nothing. Eva's anger flared hotter than her fear. She stepped forward, her voice ringing clear into the night. I'm not Hanley. I'm Boon, and I won't be taken. The crowd shifted, uncertain. Holt's men muttered, some hesitating at the defiance in her voice. Holt snarled. You can't choose a name, girl. Names are given, and yours is stained. Eva's chin lifted. Then watch how I live with it. Watch how I make it clean. For a heartbeat, the night stilled. Calder's eyes flicked toward her, pride burning deep and quiet. Then Holt snapped his hand. Bring them out. The men surged forward. Calder fired into the air, the cracks splitting the night. Horses screamed, riders faltered. Another step, Calder growled, and the next bullet finds a man, not the sky. The mob hesitated. Holt cursed, pushing his horse closer. You think you scare me, Reed? But then, a sound rose behind them. Lanterns, dozens, townsfolk spilling down the ridge, voices rising, farmers, wives, even the preacher with his Bible. Raised high. They'd come again, stronger this time, no longer just witnesses but defenders. Leave 'em be, one farmer shouted. She's Boon now, another cried. You'll not tear apart what God's joined, the preacher's voice boomed. The mob wavered, their numbers suddenly not so certain. Holt's face twisted with fury. He drew his pistol, pointing it straight at Calder. Then I'll end this myself. The world slowed. Eva saw the glint of steel, the finger tightening on the trigger. Without thinking, she moved, throwing herself between Calder and the sheriff. Eva! Calder's roar ripped the night. The shot cracked. The crowd screamed. Eva staggered, but the bullet struck the wooden post inches from her shoulder, splintering it to shards. Calder raised his rifle in a heartbeat, aiming square at Holt. His voice thundered, raw and shaking the very ground. Put it down, Holt. Put it down, or by God I'll end you. Holt froze, pistol still smoking. His men shifted nervously, some lowering their torches, others muttering about murder and madness. The preacher stepped forward, voice ringing. This is not law, Holt. This is vengeance, and you stand alone in it. The crowd pressed closer. Holt's men backed away, their bravado crumbling. Only Holt remained, seething, his pistol trembling in his hand. Eva stood tall, her voice clear despite the pounding of her heart. You called me nameless. But tonight, this town calls me Boon. And you, she pointed at Holt, eyes blazing, you'll be remembered not as law, but as shame. The weight of her words fell heavy. Holt's hand shook. Then, with a snarl, he dropped the pistol into the dirt. The mob dissolved, slipping back into the dark. Torches guttered, rifles lowered. Holt mounted his horse, his pride shattered, his power broken. This ain't over, he spat, but his voice cracked, not by a long shot. Calder's rifle never wavered. It is tonight. With curses trailing like smoke, Holt yanked his reins and rode into the darkness. His men followed, their torches dwindling one by one. Silence crashed over the ranch. The townsfolk lingered, some stepping forward to clasp Calder's hand, others to murmur words of support to Eva. Children giggled nervously, the fear ebbing into relief. Eli puffed his chest with pride. Ruth clung to Eva's skirts. Jonah babbled. Boon, again and again, his little voice carrying like a hymn. Eva stood in the center of it all, trembling but unbroken. Calder placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and firm. You stood taller than any law tonight, he said quietly. Her throat tightened, but she managed a small smile. We stood together. The fire smoldered low, the night finally still. Eva looked around at the ranch, the barn scarred by flame, the ground littered with ash, yet still standing. And she knew this was no longer just Calder's land. This was their home. Eva Boon had claimed her place, not by birth, but by fire, by courage and by choice. Morning came with silence too full to fear. The ranch smelled of damp ash, but the sky stretched clear and golden. Eva stepped into the yard, Jonah perched on her hip, Ruth skipping barefoot through the grass, Eli carrying a bucket with more pride than strength. For the first time in months the world felt still. The barn, though scarred by fire, stood tall. The fences held. The land had endured, just as they had. Calder walked from the stable, sleeves rolled, hands roughened by the work of rebuilding. His eyes met Eva's, steady, quiet, but carrying something new. Not just duty, belonging. "You slept?" he asked. Eva smiled faintly. "For once, yes." He nodded, gaze shifting to the children tumbling through the yard. "They laugh easy again. That's how it ought to be." Eva's chest warmed. She had feared their laughter was gone forever, but here it rang like church bells, bright and certain. Dust River whispered of the night Holt lost. Some said Reed faced down the sheriff's gun and won. Others said the town itself rose up to defend a girl who had no name until she gave herself one. Whatever the telling, Eva Boon's name spread. In town, Mr. Kramer no longer glared when she bought flour. The preacher smiled wider when she passed. Even the women who once whispered behind their hands now nodded, grudging but respectful. It wasn't complete acceptance, but it was a beginning. And Eva had learned that beginnings, not endings, were the true measure of survival. Weeks passed. The barn became more than shelter. Calder and Eva cleared its loft, scrubbed its floors, and patched its roof. The children lined up small desks they'd built from scrap. Chalk dust rose, filling the air with possibility. "School," Eva whispered. The first morning she gathered the orphans Dust River had forgotten, the ones who wandered alleys, slept in stables, were left behind like she once had been. Her voice carried steady as she spoke their names aloud, one by one, writing them in chalk on the rough boards. Names mattered.
They anchored children to the world. And in her heart, Eva carved a vow. No child in Dust River would ever be nameless again. One evening, as the sun bled copper over the hills, Calder set down his tools and stood in the doorway of the barn. Eva
was inside, helping Ruth sound out words, Jonah curled at her feet, Eli sketching cattle on a scrap of slate. For a moment, Calder just watched. The girl who had arrived broken, shoulders bowed under shame, now stood tall, voice gentle but sure, the children around her radiant with life. When she noticed him, her smile came easy. "What is it?" He stepped closer, removing his hat, his voice low but certain. "Eva Boon. That's a name worth keeping." Her breath caught. In his eyes she saw not just gratitude, but promise. A future not forced by law or blood, but chosen. She reached out, her fingers brushing his calloused hand. "Then let's keep it together." The wedding came quiet. No grand feast, no gilded vows. Just the preacher, a handful of neighbors, children giggling, and Calder standing steady at her side. Eva spoke her vows with tears trembling in her eyes. "I was left with nothing but sorrow and shame. But today, I take your name, not because I must, but because I choose. Together we build, together we belong." The town cheered, lanterns swung, and Jonah shouted, "Boon!" loud enough to shake the rafters. Years would pass. Dust River would remember the barn that became a school, the children who found a family there, the rancher who stood against fire and law to defend them. But most of all, they would remember Eva Boon, the girl who shed a name of shame, who carved a new one out of courage, who turned hardship into legacy. In Dust River, they said a name could be a curse or a blessing. But Eva proved a name is what you make it. She was left with nothing, no kin, no place, no hope. Yet she chose a name, and with it carved a family, a school, and a life worth living. And that, folks, is how history remembers Eva Boon. So if this tale found your heart, don't let it end here. Share it with a friend who needs reminding that family isn't always blood, it's chosen. And ride along with us by subscribing, because out here on the Shadow Frontier, every story is one step closer to hope.